What's up, class? Miss Brown here. Today we are talking about interpersonal conflict. Okay, chapter 11. This is such an important chapter, so I really hope you'll follow along with me and hopefully you'll get some good content from this lecture that you can really put forth in your daily life and in your interpersonal relationships. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? So, we are going to dive deep. We really only have 17 slides though, so it should go a little bit quicker. We're going to talk about the nature of interpersonal conflict first. Then, for our second main point, we'll look at conflict in personal relationships. We're going to talk about power and conflict, and then we'll wrap everything up by talking about managing that interpersonal conflict. Um, in your relationships. Okay, so let's define interpersonal conflict. So your textbook defines it very lengthy, and we'll break it down here in a minute, I promise. But interpersonal conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two people who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other person in achieving their goals. I know that seems like a lot, so let's break it down, okay? So there's just key points that I want you to remember from that definition. Conflict is an expressed struggle, okay? So conflict sounds really bad, but really it's just struggle, right? We're struggling. And so we're going to talk about ways that we can work on that struggle in this lecture. So, it occurs between two or more people. So, yes, it can be more than two people, and that can make it even more muddy sometimes. Also, what's important about this definition for interpersonal conflict is it's about goals that the parties perceive to be incompatible, right? Perceive. So, even though our perception is, whatever it is, it could be wrong, right? Maybe we're perceiving something incorrectly. So, it's good for us to work those things out. And then arises over perceived scarce resources, right? Maybe it's needs, basic need type things, and then includes interference. So I know that's a really big definition. So I thought that it'd be great to kind of break it down here. But what I really love the most is that conflict is an expressed struggle, right? We're struggling. And so hopefully today we'll give you some tools to work on those struggles. Okay, but it's important to note that conflict is natural in relationships. It's just supernatural. Maybe not supernatural, but it is natural for it to happen. A lot of people say, oh, we never fight, but really conflict can be beneficial, as you see here. It can be a good thing, right? So I'm married, and me and my husband, we have struggle, right? Sometimes we have conflict, but honestly, it makes us stronger once we work out that struggle, and then we're able to help each other realize what the other needs. So conflict can be good, right? If it's done in a healthy way. However, if done in an unhealthy way, it can be harmful, as we probably have all experienced in some form. And then it can be direct or indirect, right? Some people are more passive aggressive than others. And then it has content, relational, and procedural dimensions. So there's lots of different layers of conflict, okay? And we'll dive into those today. Okay, so let's look at conflict in personal relationships, like certain topics in marriage. We're just going to go with that today because it's hopefully you might not want to be married one day, but you're probably going to have at least a partner in some aspect of your life as you move forward. So personal criticisms is the number one for common conflict in marriage, right? So you'll hear, I'll feel like a lot of men say nagging, right? Those personal criticisms. Finances, that's a huge one. Chores, children, employment, in-laws, use of time. All of these things are really big topics for conflict in those personal relationships. And then, so if we can realize it, then we can create sidewalks whenever those struggles happen, right? So, like, I'm just giving you my personal example. So, like, for finances, me and my husband have a together account, but we also have our separate accounts. That way, it really doesn't, we don't have to have those conflicts, right? Everything's pretty much separate other than our savings. That way, we don't even have to worry about, having that conflict, right? He spends his money. I don't even like he spends on his whatever he wants to, and Miss Brown spends her money on what she wants to, and then we don't have to really worry about it. We also have our together savings where if we're buying something for the house, we can dip into that. and so on and so forth. So hopefully that's a good example there. But there are gender conflicts, right? So it's important to talk about that. We're all different. And so here's some three little tips here. So girls and women are encouraged by gender socialization to play nice and avoid conflict. Speaking as a woman, I can say that's pretty much an accurate generalization. So sometimes I feel like I am more passive aggressive because I'm supposed to play nice, right? I'm not supposed to be confrontational with people or like express a lot of things. But that's not right, right? I'm supposed to be able to talk about my feelings and what I perceive as like maybe an obstacle in relationships. So good things for us to just realize like, hey, we still need to use our voice, right? Women, men, gender roles, we need to look at those things. Also, boys and men are encouraged to engage in conflict directly using competitive or aggressive behaviors, but also, again, not to hurt women. So, you do see more men like physically fighting, right? Fist fighting, where like girls are more verbal in a way. Okay. So that's kind of a difference there. And then passive aggressive aggression and demand withdrawal patterns frequently characterize conflict between women and men. So those are just different ways that people handle conflict, and we'll go into that more later. Culture and conflict. Individualistic cultures teach people to stand up for themselves in the face of conflict. So I think that in the US, we're more individualistic and we are really taught to stand up for ourselves and for others in conflict. However, collectivistic cultures encourage accommodation rather than conflict to preserve group harmony. Also, language used during conflict can differ between low and high context cultures, and then cross cultural conflict is common because of different traditions and expectations, right? So, my sister married someone from a complete different culture than her, and that's awesome. I think that makes their relationship more rich. However, at some points there are conflict, right? Because they have different cultures. So it's important that they know that so they can work on those struggles. Okay, so conflict in personal relationships, they can be really common online. The disinhibition effect encourages people to say or do things online that they would not say in person, right? So um, it's really important that you try not to say anything online or in an email, especially at work, that you wouldn't say to someone's face, right? So online gives us like a shield, but it's important to know that the people have feelings and like we should be conscious of that. So this can encourage new conflicts or inflame existing ones, right? So maybe you like don't want to talk about your conflict with your partner in person because you're kind of nervous about it. And so you go to like text messaging or things like that. Well, that's not always great because then you might say something that you really wouldn't say in person. So it's always good to kind of handle conflict situations face to face because it's the best mode of communication, right? There's more channels in face to face. Also, several communication strategies can help people avoid or manage conflict in online settings. Okay, so let's transition here to power and conflict. How does power relate to conflict? Well, let's first talk about what power is. Power is the ability to influence or control other people or events. Power is usually context specific. It is always present in most relationships, and power influences communication. It can be positive or it can also be negative. And then power and conflict influence each other, right? So, like in power, like for I'm a mom, I have power over my children, and that is always present in our communication, right? If they're doing something bad, I'm going to address that behavior and like they might have to go sit in timeout for a little bit. They're not going to like it, but that is something that for me in my role, I have to exercise that power. So I'm not going to go through all this. I'm going to let you guys read it. We're running out of time here. But French and Raven's 5 forms of power include the following: reward power, coercive power, referent power, legitimate power, and then expert power. So those are just different types of power. So let's just look at expert power. Okay, number 5. Expert power is power based on specialized knowledge, skills, or expertise, right? So I'm going to use Simone Biles. She is an expert in gymnastics, and so she has expert power over Miss Brown in gymnastics, right? No idea half the stuff with gymnastics, all right? Or things like that. So those are just the different types of power roles there. And then gender does influence power. Patriarchy is a common organizing principle for human societies, and several nations nonetheless have female heads of state or heads of government. Okay, we're going to skip over this one because I really want us to get to this important stuff right here. So, Gottman's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse talks about 4 different ways that we manage conflict. Okay, so number 1 being criticism, 2 contempt, 3 defensiveness, and then 4 stonewalling. So I have a website here that you can click on in our PowerPoint to look at this. It goes way more into this, and you can kind of see which one that you go for. um, I mean, we all go usually to one of the 4, but different conflicts make you feel different ways. So sometimes we might be in a different one, but like these are really cool things for you to kind of do a little bit more research on to see which one you kind of gravitate towards. If you want to click on that link below and just check out that website there. But it really is a fun read if you want to look more into that. Okay, now let's talk about strategies for managing conflict. You could do competing, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, and collaborating. And I also have a website down here where it goes more into depth on the different types of managing conflict and when you should use certain scenarios, right? So, avoiding isn't always great, but there are certain scenarios where to manage a certain conflict, you might just want to avoid it, right? Like in class, if I have potentially a student who's just talking out all the time, yes, I'm going to address it, but there are going to be times where maybe I'm just going to avoid it and just keep going, right? So that we get what we need to get done. Also, compromising is a good one for certain situations. Even competing can be a good one, right? Maybe you need to do like rock, paper, scissors to solve an issue, things like that. So check those out. That's a fun thing too. Okay, so that is all we have today. I told you it'd be a little bit shorter. We talked about the nature of interpersonal conflict, conflict in personal relationships. We looked at power and conflict, and then managing interpersonal conflict. So there's so many different ways that you can build it's what I call sidewalks to really help conflict. But just remember that conflict can be beneficial if done correctly, right? We don't always want to agree with people because that's not, good for us to always just agree and please people. We want to use our voice. However, you can have conflict in a positive way, right? So it's interpersonal conflict. Remember, we just said it's struggle. So there's always ways that we can solve those struggles if we use communication tools to do so. All right, let me know if you have any questions.